Hey everyone, welcome to the November Database Security Office Hours on the Ask Tom platform. I'm your host. My name is Richard Evans. I'm a product manager on the Oracle Database Security team. So I'm joined by my friend and colleague and senior lead developer, Anita, who's going to be taking your questions in the chat and then chiming in occasionally here too, as well as my friend and colleague, Nadia, who's going to talk to you about Audit Vault and Database Firewall updates. And then a couple of my other PM friends who are joining us here for this session. So thanks, Akeem and Angeline, for joining us. So this call is being recorded. It will be available on the Ask Tom platform next week or so. There's 5 years or so worth of recordings out there. I'll paste the link into the Zoom chat. Hopefully you can click those. I'm not sure you can copy, but at the very least, you can click it. You can go to Ask Tom, look at all sessions, or view recordings, I think it says now, and get to this presentation here in a few days. If you've not joined us before, welcome. Thanks for joining. This is a public session where we talk about Oracle Database Security. We talk about announcements. We'll have a technical topic. Today we're talking about Oracle Database Vault. And then we'll have a Q&A opportunity. You can ask during in the QA box, and if we can answer it, we'll answer it. If not, we can take it offline as well. But second Wednesday of every month, we hold this session. We've been doing it for 5+ years now. We appreciate y'all joining us today. Getting to some announcements. I try to put everything I talk about on this GitHub repository, and I'll paste this again if you've just come into the meeting. Welcome. This GitHub has about 3 years worth of notes out there. So what you're going to see out there is sample scripts or Moss note links or LiveLabs or documentation links. So we try to make it a little easier for you to pay attention to the presentation and not worry about missing some of this information. Okay? We always talk about patching. Patches were released on October 15th. Please update your database as well as your enterprise manager, as well as your applications, as well as your operating system. Please stay on top of those patches. You can check out oracle.com/security-alerts for information on patching, security alerts, and any bulletins we have out there. If you're a real application cluster, check out Fleet Patching and Provisioning. Might make your life a little easier for patching grid infrastructure as well as the database. And then check out Mike Dietrich's blog, mikedietrichde.com, for Oracle patching and upgrade information. He's kind of the source of all knowledge when it comes to patching and upgrades. It's a great blog. Nadia, can I turn it over to you here for a second?
Yes, thank you so much, Rich. Okay, so thank you for giving me this time. I'll take as much less time as possible. Okay, so let's start with so here I'm announcing availability of Oracle Audit Vault Database Firewall Release Update 20.13. The current available release is 20.12. This week, by this week, Friday or Thursday, Friday, we will be releasing 20.13. We are in process of uploading everything and all. So I thought it's a good chance to just give you update that what you should expect in 20.13. So AVDF had been database activity monitoring solution. The most common use cases like monitoring privileged user activities or getting notified on some suspicious activities, protect and prevent your most critical data or sensitive data from any unauthorized access. And one of the most important use case for database activity monitoring solutions are complying with regulatory compliance. They ask for different type of audit reports, and AVDF can help you to get that. And finally, a lot of customers do after incident analysis, like if some breach happened, why it happened, what happened, who was accessing what, when, where. So a lot of analysis and all that. So these are like some top 5 use cases for database activity monitoring solution, and hence for AVDF. But AVDF has come a long way from last couple of years. We kind of change what AVDF can do, just being in the bucket of database activity monitoring solution. To start, we introduce so our vision is to make AVDF as a security control for your data enterprise. And in that vision or mission that we have, we started adding a lot of other part of it. So for example, we started with posture management, where you can discover database, sensitive data, privileged users on your system, and finally assess that what is the security posture of your database. Then collecting audit logs or audit collection, not only from standard databases, but anything which can provide audit collection in different, even in different formats, like built-in. So we have built-in plugins, as well as different method like QuickJSON, QuickCSV. So if your audit is available or audit logs are available in different format, you can collect it from database or non-database targets, including network-based SQLs. Now with 20.13, you will something we introduce SQL Firewall in AVDF 20. Uh, in sorry, we introduce. Okay, so I should I skip that? Can you go back, Rich? Yeah, let me just quickly wrap this up. So we introduced 23 AI in 23 AI. We introduced SQL Firewall. So now you'll be able to collect violation log of those, then key vault, audit logs, database vault. The other part is policy management, where you are able to provision and manage Oracle Unified Audit Policy along with database firewall and alert policy for Oracle and non-Oracle database. And finally, deep analysis, where you can do efficient reporting, analytics, etc. So yeah, next slide, Rich. So with specifically 20.13 release, it's kind of a feature-packed release. We have introduced a lot of enhancement, as well as requests that customers were asking, and few things that we wanted to do it as a strategic step. So the very first thing that now you will be able to monitor and protect your 23 AI database target. Other part is important, that you will be able to collect SQL Firewall violation log in AVDF. That's something SQL Firewall, like I said, was introduced in 23 AI. So you'll be able to collect those violation log as well in AVDF. It is available in all activity report. The third one was more a gap. So we have to monitor network-based SQL, we had agent and non-agent-based deployment, right? Say, like host monitor, proxy mode, or out-of-band mode. So in host monitor, now we have introduced functionality that you will be able to even monitor local or bequet connection, which was not there earlier. So if you install host-based agent or host monitor, so you will be able not only be able to collect network-based SQL statement, but also will be able to monitor bequet or local connections happening to the database. This is another important functionality. The fourth one is policing of police, is something we introduced, which is like self-auditing. So we had been doing audit of AVDF system or AVDF appliance itself at the database and on operating system layer, but we were not doing it at console level, right? So like AV auditor or AV admin, if going and adding user or modifying policies, etc. So that was not being monitored. That's something we have introduced, and we brought a whole set of new section for AVDF system audit reports. So where you can evaluate database audit reports, operating system audit reports, as well as application level. We are calling AVDF application audit reports. So you can even monitor that. So I'll show you a couple of screenshots. If you are using AVDF, then I think you will be able to you'll be excited to see that. We introduced global set concept a few are used back in database firewall, then have taken it to all activity and GDPR. Now we introduce that concept in alert policy condition as well, making things more simplified for you. And and more unified from the solution perspective. A lot of customer from our security assessment functionality, a lot of customer were saying that, okay, whatever the assessment risk you have, these are the standard ones approved from CIS, STIG, or as a best practice from Oracle database. But let's say for a specific organization, there are some risks which are of not that severity level, or we don't want to really uh, uh, we don't want our report to show that particular risk. So we are giving you a flexibility that you can customize your baseline, for example, in a sense that you can lower the severity, or you can even have the exception for that particular for that particular risk. So when you are running, moving forward, whatever the assessment you are running, it will take that, and it will give you the drift report basis on that. Multi-cloud environment, Oracle has been announcing its support for multi-cloud, and in that strategy, now AVDF can be deployed on AWS. It is so you can go to Oracle eDelivery website, and the way you download AVDF ISO, there you will find image to download for AWS as well, and you can go and deploy AVDF that image on AWS itself, right? So that's something we have done. The other part, what we have done, we introduced agent-less collection some time back, but it was supported on a standalone. It was not supported on high availability. Like if Audit Vault server is deployed in high availability mode, it was not available. So that's something I have done it. We have done it in 20.13, and finally we updated security assessment. Basically, AVDF security assessment integrates with the DBSAT, database security assessment tool of Oracle in backend. So there was a new latest release. It has a better it has more assessments included and updated as per CIS and STIG recommendations. So we have updated that as well in 20.13. So some of the, you can skip this one. So some of screenshots. So for example, database discovery, if you are going and deploying AVD a first time, or after some time you want to see delta, like if there is a silent or a rogue database in your environment and you want to see whether it's been monitored from AVDF or not, we are giving you flexibility to import your Nmap scan in XML format in AVDF data discovery functionality. Then we map the IP address port and the database type and give it to you. The super admin can register themselves that target, or they can assign it to some other non-super admin, but just an admin. And let's say if you want to ignore something, for example, you don't want to register right now, or you don't want going forward that particular target to be pop up in your list of to be registered kind of a list, this discovered database list. So you can ignore that target for that time, add some comment, and later on, if you decide to register that, then you can pull it back to the main list and then register that target. So these are the flexibility we are giving. Global sets, you see, a couple of RUs back, we kind of revamped alert policy page, where we introduce, like, you can making condition more simplified, like adding from examples or different alert policies, or even using filters of all activity report and taking that condition into alert condition. But now what we have also introduced is that you can create your condition using global sets. Can you click next? Yeah. So if you click there, you will find out there are different type of global sets at the session level, like 5 types: IP address, DB user, operating system, program user. So I think 5 sets are there, 5 type of sets are there. So you can select that type, and whatever the set you have created, you can select that set, and you can select your operator in, not in, and add that condition in your alert policy. Next slide, please, Raj. Okay, so this is how AVDF system reports look like. So there's a new section which is called AVDF system audit reports. And then you have, in that you have like all activity, you have application auditing, database auditing, and OS auditing. So if you read their description, they are AVDF appliance application audit reports, or AVDF appliance embedded database audit, or AVDF appliance embedded operating system audit reports are there. So this is how application auditing will look like. For example, your client program is AVDF console. So if user is creating any admin is created, password is updated, or even we are capturing the failure. So for example, you are not giving as per standard. You are using some special cases in creating user and it's been failed, right? That's not allowed. So that's something also being captured. And if you are adding any target, updating anything, adding any policy, updating any policy, all that is captured here. This is the requirement from most of the regulations, and so now we are providing in much simplified way. You can add filters and just extract the report and give it to your auditor. And this is available only for super auditor. Okay, it's not available for all users. Okay, so finally, AVDF on the path of giving you security control for your data enterprise, starting with database data discovery, user entitlement, drift, security assessment, activity auditing, which we were doing, and database firewall, protecting and preventing. All that 20.13 feature that I have talked about, if you go next week, not this week, but next week, that will be updated in LiveLab. You can scan this QR code for AVDF LiveLab and you can experience all that 20.13 new features in that LiveLab. So next week, you can go and see that. That will be updated.
Awesome. Thanks,
Hey,
Saskia. Appreciate it.
thank you, Rich.
Continuing the LiveLab theme, we've got over 40 LiveLabs out there for you. More than half of them you can do on our dime. So you can spin them up as a green button lab, go through them, gives you an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours worth of compute time, autonomous database time, and you can kick the tires on AVDF, database vault, TDE, key vault, data redaction, lots of things that you can do on our dime, right? So we encourage you to go out there and check it out. We've got this new lab out there you can do on a free tenancy for Oracle Data Redaction. So you can spin up a 23 AI free. You can go through the lab. You can get your hands on kind of the new capabilities in Oracle Database 23.6 for Oracle Data Redaction. All right, let's get to the presentation here. So the agenda is going to look like this, and then I'm going to repaste a few things for folks who came in a couple minutes late here. You'll see the GitHub repository there. When we get to the examples, I'll show you, you can follow along. You can do this in your environment, or you can just do the LiveLab if you wish. But we've got the Ask Tom repository out here of information from our kind of cliff notes, our cheat sheet of our presentation. And you'll see the demonstration I give today is available here on our DBSec office hours example. So you can click on that SQL. You'll see it kind of walks through creating users, creating roles, granting privileges, and then creating that sample table that you're going to see today. Okay. But let's get started here. Oracle Data Redaction is a part of the Advanced Security License. So comes in two parts. You've got transparent data encryption. Most of you guys, probably everybody here is aware of transparent data encryption, encrypting that data at rest, disks, backups, exports. Data redaction is the other half of that advanced security option. Now, if you're in the cloud and you're using autonomous database, you have both automatically. If you're using XSCS, XSCC, if you're using DB database-based systems, the extreme or high performance, your license probably already includes the TDE and data redaction. Check with your sales guy to make sure, but you should have access to data redaction. And then what data redaction allows you to do is just change the output of the data. We're not physically changing data on disk. We're not masking the data, right? We're not doing static data masking. We're doing a dynamic data masking. So doesn't change the actual data, just changes the output of the SQL. And you can do that dynamically by kind of knowing who the user is, what their IP address is, and other factors about the database. So the authorized user here may see the full credit card information, and our redacted display may only see the last four. So we can do this with data redaction without altering that physical data, the actual data itself. And if you're using Oracle Enterprise Manager, you can do this through the Enterprise Manager Cloud Control UI. You can go in there and create policies, add columns, and set up different redaction types. Today, I'm going to take you through using the PL SQL package DBMS redact. And that's what the script does for you. So you can go through that and you can kind of get an idea of how data redaction works. All right. So how do you use it? All right. The first thing is identifying your sensitive data. So like Nazia said, you can use DBSAT. That can be included in Audit Vault and Database Firewall, or you can use Oracle Data Safe. But we need to know what sensitive data we have in the database in order to mask that data. So let's say we discover dates of birth, we discover social security numbers, social identifier numbers, email addresses, or credit card, or account numbers that we want to mask, right? So we want to identify this data first, and then we want to decide how we want to mask it, what we want to do with that data. Data redaction provides four common, and we'll talk about a couple more here in a minute, types of ways to redact that data. So if we took our date of birth, maybe we just want to redact it down to January 1st, 2001, right? That's what we want all those dates to be. So everyone knows, oh, that's a redacted value, and they don't think of it as the real value there. Maybe we just want to partially redact the data. We just want to show the last four of the credit card, the social security number, the account number, whatever it is. We just want to do a partial redaction there. Maybe we have things that are a little different here, right? Where that first name, last name isn't a fixed length. So we want to use regular expressions to redact. And if you're familiar with Linux and you've done regular expressions in sed, awk, grep, or vi before, then you'll be comfortable doing regular expressions in data redaction. And we've got a couple little cheats for you too, we'll talk about. But sometimes that first name, last name is not always the same. And we just want to redact whatever is before the @ symbol, and we can do that with data redaction regular expression functions. And then maybe we just want to do a random redaction too. So we know that number is there, and we know we just want to say, okay, whatever it is, we want to redact it randomly. So every time a query comes up, we just want to know, all right, it's just going to give us whatever non-real value it gives us for that column on that particular query. So kind of the four major supported transformations here for Oracle Data Redaction. And how we get started is we first need to create kind of the user and grant the appropriate privileges. So what I do in my demonstration is we're going to grant read on these sys objects. Now I'm going to grant read on redaction policies so I can see the redaction policies that are available. I'm going to grant read on redaction columns so I can see what columns have redaction policies. Redaction expressions, we'll talk about that when we get to named policy expressions and what they do for us. And then the last one is what the redaction value is when it fully redacts. Is it a 0? Is it a null? Is it a January 1st, 2001? And we can change that. And we do that in the lab, that hands-on lab that I talked about. But we want to do that. And then we need to grant the user execute on the PL SQL package. Okay. In 23 AI, we've introduced a little more control here where we want to grant administer redaction policies so they can actually administer these policies on the objects. Now, previously, you didn't need this, but hey, we want to control who has access to be able to administer these redaction policies. So we've created this system or schema level privilege that you can grant. Now, realistically, what I would prefer is for you to grant this to a role instead. Create a redact admin role, create a, redact app data role, and then give these reads and this execution on this package and this system or schema privilege to that role instead versus granting it to an individual user. My example, I just granted it to an individual user for example purposes, but think about what you can do if you grant it to a role. Then you can grant that role to other users. You can have somebody in charge of granting that role to other administrators if they have the with admin option. If you're doing any kind of directory integration where you could map maybe roles to groups in Active Directory, then you could manage it that way instead. So rather than thinking about granting it to the individual user, think about what you can do long term by granting these privileges to a role and then granting that role to the user instead. Okay? The last privilege that I may or may not want to grant is this exempt redaction policy. Okay. This exempt redaction policy means that the user who runs the query is exempt from the redaction policy. So they will see actual data every time they run the query, right? We want to use that extremely sparingly because it is a high-level privilege. And plus, it gets audited, right? It gets audited because any use of a privilege like that, it's like, well, hold on a second, who is using that and who is accessing data that has a redaction policy associated with it? And we want to audit that behavior, that use of that exempt redaction policy. Okay, so use very sparingly. Just know that sys and system, they have this privilege by default. You can't take it away. And so we want you to move toward named user accounts instead, right? I know we've told you for 40 years, /assist DBA, log in and do your activity, but we're trying to get customers to move toward is using named accounts. I should be logging in as R. Evans instead, and then I should have the privileges I need to conduct activity, not necessarily to get past that data redaction policy, okay? So once we've created our user, we want to create our policy. And in this example, we've got our add policy statement here. So we're going to add policy. We're going to add it on SH1. We are going to add it to the customer's table, and we're going to give this policy a name, something simple here like redact sensitive data. And then what we're going to do is we're going to apply our expression here. So we're going to redact data for all users that are not SH1, right? In this example, when we start, we're going to say where 1 equals 1, so we can redact data for any user who queries the data who does not have that exempt policy admin system privilege, right? So this is how we get started with data redaction. We create the policy, we choose the schema, we choose the table, we give it a name, and then we tell it under what conditions are you going to redact data. We're going to redact data whenever the session user is not SH1. Okay. Now, what we do next, and you can do this as a part of one command if you like. I like to separate it to kind of show you that there's a distinction without a difference here. You can add the policy and then add the column at the same time. I chose to alter the policy here and to say, okay, I've got my redact sensitive data policy. I'm going to add this customer marital status column to it. And then I'm going to add it to the policy with this add column function. And then I'm going to fully redact, right? I'm going to fully redact what that is, what data gets returned to the end user there. So, and we'll talk about what that means. It can return a varchar, it can return a space, it can return, the date, it can return a null value. It depends on what type of function we use in there. When we use full, it's going to return just, let's say, a space if it's a varchar or a char value, okay? So let me talk about the different types that we can put in there, okay? We can put in none. That doesn't do us much good, but it does help you get started with your policy creation if you want. It doesn't redact any data. So it goes through the process, but doesn't actually redact any of the data. Gives you that option to get started. Probably not super useful for you after just kicking the tires on it. The next one is nullify, right? So if we want to redact 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it'll redact it to null. And why that matters is by default with full data redaction, it's going to redact it to the data type that the column is, right? So if it's a number data type, it's going to redact it to 0. If it's a character or a varchar data type, it's going to redact it to a single space. You could change that. But it's going to give you that ability with full to redact it to the appropriate data type. Nullify says, okay, I just want to redact it to null. I don't really care. I'm not processing that data type on the remote end where I'm looking for a specific number, varchar, date, time, anything like that, okay? And then date time, when you do a full redaction, is going to redact it to January 1st, 2001. Okay. Now, there's going to be times where you say, well, I don't want to redact things fully. I just maybe want to do some partial redaction. I just want to hide maybe the last four of the social security number here. You can do that. Data redaction gives you this partial capability, but the caveat is that your data must remain fixed. So this works great for credit cards. This works great for social identifiers, numbers, columns that have that fixed length, and you know what that's going to be every time. It doesn't work so great when you're talking about email addresses or things that could remain, that could be a variable length there. For that, we've offered regular expression redaction. So we can we can redact columns with regular expression. Say that 10 times fast. Let's say, for example, the email address, right? We want to maybe put redact in it instead of the user email address. So it allows us to redact strings of variable length. Okay. The final one here we're going to talk about is redacting on a random basis. So if we've got a char, it's going to redact it to a same length of a char. If we've got a varchar, it's going to redact it and replace it with a random assortment of alphanumeric characters of whatever the actual data length is. We've got numbers, it's going to redact it to a non-negative random number. And then with date, it's going to redact it to a random kind of cis-generated number there that doesn't include that original value, okay? So these are the things we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to give you some examples of this. I'm not going to give you examples of none or nullify because those are pretty straightforward, but I'm going to give you examples of full, partial, regular expression, and random. Before we do that, we have to know, okay, well, what data types does this apply to, right? Like what can I redact within the Oracle database, okay? The good news is for full redaction, you can redact most built-in data types. So you can say, hey, I want to fully redact blobs, booleans, chars, clobs, numbers, date, timestamps, varchars, etc. So full redaction is available for most of the built-in data types that Oracle provides. Same thing with the nullify, right? So the nullify here is available as well for most of the built-in Oracle data types we provide. Where we get into a little bit of a gray area is this in between, right? So if we look at blobs, nothing for partial, nothing for regular expression, nothing for random. Because a blob is a binary object, I'm not really sure what we should replace it with or partially replace it. So we just don't get into that. For varchars, yes. For partial, yes. For regular expression, yes. For random. For clobs, same thing. It may not make sense if we do partial, but we could do regular expression, right? Because it can be a variable length. We can offer you regular expression redaction because it is that variable length versus partial. Random, no, I'm not really sure what I could randomize your clob to, so we don't offer that, okay? But you can go through, and what I'd encourage you to do is to take a look at this new documentation we've published. So we've got the 23 AI book for data redaction that's split out from the TDE documentation now. And you can go take a look at table 2.1 for the built-in data types and the redaction capability there. So generally speaking, data redaction is available for the major data types that you're going to be using, right? Blobs, clobs, numbers, date timestamps, varchar characters. Data redaction is available to you for at least full and nullify redaction. Okay. Let's get to some examples here. Now, remember, these examples are available on my GitHub repository. I'll share this in the Zoom chat again if you came in a couple minutes late here. You can get to this, and it's got a history of 2 or 3 years worth of kind of cheat sheets for us. But what I'm going to talk about today is available for you in this office hours example SQL. And you're going to probably want to do it against a 23.6 cloud database. That'd be easier. But you could do some of the basic redaction, these things in this section against your 19C database as well. Okay. All right. We're going to create a new table called T1 This table has all sorts of sensitive data that you probably won't see in one table. But for example purposes, we've jammed it all into one table and we're going to work with this. We've got char, we've got varchar, we've got dates, we've got numbers. So we've got a good distribution of the standard data types that you work with in a database. And we're going to create a policy associated with it. Okay. So this policy, we're just saying it's redact T1, and we're going to want to redact everything. So every user who queries this table sees redacted data, except for those users who have exempt policy access, exempt redaction policy there. We don't want them querying that data. Maybe we use Database Vault to block their access. Okay. And then the first thing you're going to do is say, hey, I want to go check what the redaction policies show me so I can see what redaction policies we have out there. And you can see here that we've just got one right now. Okay, so we've got it out there, it's enabled, but we haven't applied this to any columns yet, right? We've created the policy, and now we want to apply it to columns, and we want to choose how we redact the data in those columns. So the first one we're going to do is nullify, right? We're going to start with Emily Jones. We see her first name when we query the column. We apply this redaction policy there by saying add column, and we choose the function type here, which is nullify. So we've nullified that column. Next time you query it, you're going to see no data, right? You're just going to see a null that comes back. So we've hidden that first name as a first example. You're like, well, okay, I can see some use in nullify, for various situations. But what about random? Maybe I want to randomize that number instead. So we get something back. So in the example, let's randomize the Amex column, right? So same user, Jones, Amex, and then just a hint, if you're doing this in SQL Plus, or maybe even SQL CL, I know SQL Plus for sure, you're going to want to set that column format so you can see that full number, numerical digit there. So we can see we've got our Amex, we've got the add column again. We said add column. We are adding in the Amex column, and this time we're choosing redaction of random instead. So we're going to randomly generate a numerical value here. For characters or varchars, it'll generate a random alphanumeric value instead. So if we'd done this for first name or last name, you'd see random characters in there. And for dates, it generates a random date, right? So instead, we're going to see the Amex number look like this. If you run this query 10 times, you'll probably see 10 different numbers here, right? So it is randomly generated each time the query is executed. And so you'll get a different number each time, a different date, right? A different random varchar value as well. So hopefully that explains to the end user, like, okay, this is redacted data. I can't see it. I don't need it. It's not a part of the data that I'm trying to look for there, okay? If you say, well, random is a little weird, Rich, I don't necessarily want to just randomly generate my numbers. I've got an account number, and if it was random, that'd look weird. It wouldn't really maybe follow our format. That's okay. So if we've got a fixed length varchar column, we can say we want to redact it from this value here, ending in 3579, to end in just 4 X's instead. And the way we do that is by using the partial redaction function here, right? So we're going to partially redact this data, and we're going to provide it with the format we have for our data. So we know our data is this length. So over here, you can see the input value. We want to be able to redact all the variables here. So they're all V's. And our output format is going to be all V's as well. And we want to replace that mask character, that character, with an X. You could do an asterisk, you could do an and, you could do a question mark, you could do just kind of about anything you want in there. And we want to start this at the 9th character, including the 9th character, all the way through the 12th, right? So that's how we end up down here with this redaction, this partial redaction policy on the account number, okay? So sometimes you have to play with it a little bit, right? You have to kind of get used to how you want to do it. But if you're doing it on a column data type that is something we know, like a visa, for example, Here you can see that the functional parameter isn't something that you specified here. It is something that comes out of our built-in library. So we've got a built-in library of some of these most common functions that you can use on your data. So in reality, what this one is here's the original data. Here's the input parameter that we've pre-created for you. Here's the output parameter that we've pre-created for you. And you can see here that there's an F in the middle instead of a V, right? So these Fs are those dashes, and we want to leave them alone. Those are like our fixed characters that we want to leave. And so we've got them here for you and that you can keep. So, and instead of masking with a X, we're going to choose to mask with the percent symbol instead. So we went from seeing full data to adding a partial redaction policy using our built-in format to only seeing the last four of the credit card information here. So that function parameter is one of several that we offer for you that are built in for partial redaction policies here. So you can see if you're doing the last four of the US Social Security number or the entire Social Security number, we've got social identifier, national identifier number, credit card, showing just maybe the last four of the number. And then since Amex has a different format, it's 15 digits instead of 16. We've got an Amex built-in partial redaction policy as well as zip code, date, and phone number. So we found that these are kind of the most common column data, the most common column data that customers want to redact. So we've got these built-in function parameters for you to use with partial data redaction. Okay. Now you're saying, well, Rich, I've got email addresses and that's not a fixed format. That's not an account number. That's not a credit card. I want to redact some of this too. Cool. Let's use regular expression redaction to do this. Okay. Now this looks a little hairy, right? Like this looks a little overwhelming for you, but let's break it down so we can understand what's going on. So we're using a regular expression redaction here, and then we're giving it our pattern. Okay. And then our pattern over here on the right explains that this first portion means one or more characters, right? And then we see the @ symbol, and then we do one or more characters. That would be the domain. And then we see a dot. So we know there's a dot in there somewhere. And then we know that there's 2 to 4 characters after the dot that are A to Z, capitalized or not, right? So we are breaking our email address down into different portions. So we've got the first portion, Emily Jones, which is one or more characters. We've got an @ symbol that is contained in every email address. And then we've got the domain and the .com, .net, .co, .uk, whatever it is, we've got it that we can capture there, okay? Then what we do is we choose our replacement string, right? We are dropping the word redacted in there, and then we are taking everything after the @ symbol and leaving it there. So our \2 refers to this second capture group, which in this is example.com. It could be example.co.uk, could be oracle.com, whatever it is, we are grouping it together. So we leave it there as a part of the redacted output. Okay. So we go from emily.jones@example.com to redacted at example.com. And again, you can choose to give it something else. You could say no reply at yourdomain.com. You could leave it as emily.jones and change the domain. Kind of however you want to use it. It's up to you. Regular expressions, again, kind of a love-hate relationship there, but if you're comfortable with them in a Linux environment, then you'll probably be comfortable with them here in regular expression redaction as well. Now, if you say, look, I'm really not comfortable with those, Rich, I just have a few columns that I want to work on, let's do it. Let's use our built-in capabilities instead, right? So instead of trying to figure out what that format looks like, we're going to modify our redaction, and we're going to redact that email address using our built-in patterns. So we've got regular expression redaction. We've got our regular expression pattern email address. We're telling it what that email, what that column data is. It's an email address, and we're telling it what we want to redact. We want to redact the email name. So the first half of the email, not the domain, the email address, the user itself. So instead of redacted or instead of Emily Jones, we're going to see 4X's. That's how this built-in pattern redacts that data for you. Okay. And if you're working with data other than email addresses, right, you can choose the pattern to be any digits, credit cards, credit card numbers, Amex, phone numbers, email addresses, IP addresses. Those are those built-in patterns. And I believe there's a few more if you take a look at the 23 AI documentation that you can see. And then we can also choose what we want to replace it with. In this example, I replaced email name with redacting the email domain instead. So I just don't want to show the domain to the user, right? And we can choose what we want to kind of redact that with. So let's just do single X's, single ones, whatever it is there. We can choose how we want to replace that string in our column. Okay. So we've covered nullifying, we've covered partial redaction, we've covered regular expression redaction, but there's going to be times where you want to redact columns where you may or may not want to redact the column based on maybe where that user is coming from. Okay. So each table, view, or materialized view can have one data redaction policy. That data redaction policy has an overall expression associated with it. We can create a named policy expression that overrides that default expression of 1 = 1. So what we're doing here is we're creating a named policy expression saying redact unless your analytics, this SH user, maybe, right? So redact everybody unless you're the sales history user, where that default policy we created originally was redact for everybody, right? So we're not changing the default, but what we're doing is we're creating an option to apply this to different columns. So we still have that one policy, and then we pick the columns we want to redact. But what we want to say is there's 1 or 2 columns that these other users should be able to see without a redaction policy associated with it. So we're able to kind of divide how we redact or who we redact for in the operation. So let's check this out. Okay, so we've redacted all this data, right? We've redacted account number, first name, last name, email, and that Visa number. And you say, well, I may want to get that full Visa. I may want to get that full account number. I may want to see full data there. So what we do is we apply this redaction expression to the Visa column that has a redaction policy associated with it. And we're going to change when it gets redacted. So it's redacted unless you're SH1. So we're going to override that default 1 = 1 expression with our own that we created. So now instead of only seeing the last 4 of the credit card with the column number, we can see the entire credit card number here. So SH1 sees full data here, right? Instead of all of the asterisks and only the last 4. This might be useful for your supervisors. This might be useful for certain reports where you need to see that data. This might be useful in certain situations where you're coming from a server we trust and we want you to see full data. But for everybody else, we want to redact as much as possible. So think about some different scenarios that you could use this named policy expression for. Okay. Now, when we want to query what the columns have here, we're going to create a join on a couple of views. So remember, we granted read on redaction columns and redaction expressions and redaction policies. In this query, we're going to combine 2 of these together, redaction columns, as well as our redaction expressions. That'll let us see which columns are utilizing the policy expression instead of the default expression of the policy. Does that make sense? So we can join these together and we can get information out of here. This is included in that script if you want to take a look at this query there. But just kind of a left outer join to get all of them from one view, combine it with the other view, and see where those policy expressions are attached. Okay. Now in 23.6, we released some really new, really great capabilities here. So Anita and the team have been hard at work on enhancing the capabilities of Oracle Data Redaction. We're able to get that out in 23.6. If you're on engineered systems and you're working on 23.6 has this capability. If you're on autonomous database, your autonomous database and you're on 23 should or will be upgraded to 23.6 so you can utilize these capabilities. But the first one, extended statistics are supported because they create a virtual column. Previously, we didn't support virtual columns. We do now. So extended statistics are supported. Function-based indexes are supported. And virtual columns. The base column of a virtual column is supported. And what I mean by that is, let's say you combine it to full address, or you create a customer address virtual column. But underneath, you can redact the zip code, the state, the address, whatever it is, and you'll see that redacted data up there. It'll be redacted. So we can apply these policies to the base columns of virtual columns. Not the virtual column itself, but the base column. We also support call expressions in select. So if you see here, we've got this sum here. We can support redaction policies on these columns here, C1 and C2 and 23.6. Inline views, a set operator can have a subquery. We can support that. Operators and having different policies on either side of the operation. So the union all, the intersect, the minus. You can have different policies on different sides. So T1 and T2 for different tables that were union or were intersecting or were joining somehow there. We support different policies. And then columns that have redaction policies can be used in various operations. So group by, order by, distinct. Okay. Now, what does that mean? That means if we take a query like this, something big and gnarly that has a width and all these things, we can support redaction on different columns that are used in that group by expression. We could have a redaction policy on the postal codes or the credit scores, and we can still use our group bys, our counts, our mins, our max, our averages, right? And so we can utilize data redaction and still get some results back, but not necessarily all the results that that raw data that we wouldn't want the customer to see. So this query here, if I had applied a redaction policy to the customer credit score here, this credit limit right here, what that's going to look like is it looks like this where we can see the data initially. We can see all this raw data here, their highs, their lows, their average. But if we add a data redaction policy on that credit limit column, we can turn it into where it looks like zeros instead, right? So we still get all of the customer count information. We still get all of this data over here. That was in the middle of nowhere. We can still get this information here, but we don't have to show those highs and lows or averages of the aggregate of customers. So could be useful for you when aggregating some data, getting some reports. The good news is those queries work in 23.6. So you can have those redaction policies and then still work with your data. Okay? Another example could be that we've got maybe a prediction using the customer credit limit. So we want to predict maybe what their credit score could be, but we don't want to show the actual credit limit. We don't want to show the marital status. Maybe we've done a nullify on the marital status and we've done a full redaction on the credit limit. But we could still get maybe a predicted limit here. So there's some use cases here where we want to be able to use the underlying data as a part of our query, but not necessarily be able to see that data in full, okay? So let's go a little further into what that means with the behavior of data redaction. The first thing is can't stop sys or system, right? Or other users with that exempt policy, exempt redaction policy, they have it. They're going to see actual data, unredacted data. Okay. So let's block them from accessing data using database vault instead. You can't redact data types such as JSON, XML, or user-defined data types. Take a look at the table 2.1 in our 23 documentation for the support of built-in Oracle data types. Okay, take a look at that. We talked about the majority being available for you for full, nullify, and then partial or regular expression redaction. And then when you create your expressions on what you want to redact, 1 equals 1, when you want redaction to occur, you're going to utilize syscontext primarily. You've got excess syscontext, some apex functions, and some label security functions as well. Okay. So primarily when you create your expressions, syscontext, right? That's what we're going to use. Inference attacks. All right. So in my last slide, I showed you kind of the results of what it looks like and what we can get to, right? So we can run the query, we can see all of it. Maybe we don't see some of the column data. Well, with an inference attack, we can potentially run a select and narrow down that window of what the salary is for a particular employee, right? Data redaction is not built to protect against those type of attacks. It's built to protect against we don't want this showing in this read-only report or this read-only screen there. But you could sit there and say, okay, greater than this, less than this, greater than this, less than this, and work your way to the right answer. Even though the salary column returned in the select won't show you that real value, you can infer that it is the actual value there, okay? Redacted data could be written back to the database, right? Different transactions occur with a select versus an update. If your screen just automatically updates all the data on there, then you could potentially have that data written back to the database, which is why we advocate for read-only reports, read-only screens, read-only users or users who are only query access and using data redaction, because the database doesn't know that this query over here contained redaction data, and then in the app, they took it and they wrote it back to the database, okay? If your regular expressions don't find a match, we err on the side of caution. Your data is fully redacted, okay? So that way we know, like, we don't accidentally expose that column for you. The results of expressions like concatenate, sum, min, max are going to redact to full to kind of protect that data there. And then you cannot redact addition-based views today, okay? So these are some of the understanding of the behavior. It's well documented in the 23 AI documentation. There's a section that talks about this. To kind of summarize, hey, read-only static pages are good. API gets are good. You can do queries, joins, unions, kind of any advanced analytic query that you want to do to get that data is supported. When we get into applications, a little bit of caution there for dashboards, reports, or anything that might write data back. Anything with active data pages where it would write that data back, we don't want to use data redaction in those circumstances. We want to exempt those users from that redaction and let the application control it there, right? And again, DBAs have the privilege to bypass application data redaction because they could have that exempt redaction policy. And then it's not an alternative to VPD, database vault, or masking. Masking is for dev and test. Redaction is for like your production databases where we just don't want to show the results in the query to that end user. Okay. Hopefully this gives you some idea here. If you want to learn more, check out our LiveLabs. We've got that LiveLab out there that talks about Oracle Data Redaction on Autonomous Database. We've got this call. This call will be available for you probably in a week or so. So you can go back and watch the video or share it with your colleagues. And then check out our ebook, right? We've got our ebook out there where we talk about how Oracle thinks about securing the database. Okay. I've shared this links and notes, but I'll share it again just to make sure that anybody who came in late has access to it. And then next month, Oracle Database Security Office Hours will be on Wednesday, 11 December. So please join us. You should get an email reminder a few days before the event.